We're going to continue working with the same problem that we saw in the last video. So we've got our students in grades 4 through 6, whether good grades, popularity, or sports was most important to them. And then we've got our two-way table down here with the results of that survey. So we, in this video, are going to look at how to calculate the test statistic and the p-value for this hypothesis test. If you want to look back on how to find the null and alternative hypothesis and set that up, you can go look at the previous video. But for now, we're just interested in the test statistic and the p-value. A couple things that I'll say. First of all, the test statistic depends on the probability distribution that we're using. We said we were going to use a chi-square probability distribution. So our test statistic is going to be a chi-square value rather than a z-score, which is what we're used to working with. And then, of course, the p-value is going to represent the probability that we get a sample like ours if the null hypothesis is true, same as it always has. So we're going to try and calculate the test statistic and the p-value. Now, we saw how to approximate the p-value using the table, but if we could, it is nice to be a little bit more precise. And I'm going to be 100% honest with you. Calculating the test statistic by hand is quite tedious to do. It's a long process. It's easy to make a mistake. It's generally not something I would advise you to do by hand unless you had to. So in these instances, it's going to be much, much easier for us to use our graphing calculator. Now, in order for us to do that, I need to basically enter this two-way table into my graphing calculator before I can go and do the hypothesis test. One thing that I will mention before I do that is when we enter this data in, we don't want to include our total column or our total row. We don't really care so much about that for the data entry, which means we're going to want this middle 3x3 section right here. That's what we're looking at. So let's see how we're going to enter this data in. Let me hop over to my calculator. And so we need to use our matrix menu in order to calculate this, in order to do this type of hypothesis test. So in order to access the matrix menu, I'm going to press second and then x to the -1. This will take me to my list of matrices. I need to edit these. So I'm going to arrow over to the right by 2 spots, and I'm going to choose that very first matrix, number 1, matrix A. And what you'll notice is we don't have enough spots for our data. Right now, this is a 1x1. So we need to make it bigger. The first number that you'll see right there that it's currently blinking on represents the number of rows that we have. So if I was to change this to a 3, I should see 3 numbers stacked horizontally on each other. So that's what we see right there, 3 zeros. And if I go back and look at my table, we had a 3x3. So I have 1, 2, 3 rows by 1, 2, 3 columns. So I also need 3 columns here. So this is a nice square matrix. It's just going to be a 3x3. And then the next thing that I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to enter all this data. So we can look back at our table. If you need to pause the video right here, you can. We're going to enter this data in exactly as we see it. We don't need to add anything or do anything differently. Just the exact order that we see that data, that's how we're going to put it into our graphing calculator. So I have it up on a separate screen. I'm going to reference that. So let's see, we have 63, and then after each one, we're going to have to press enter. 31, and then press enter. 25, press enter. 88, and then 55 and 33. And then for our last row, we should have 96, 55, and 32. So we should have our data entered into our graphing calculator. Our matrix is complete. We're all ready to go then. So we can quit out of this menu if you like. Go back to our home screen and press second mode. So this takes us back to our home screen. And at this point, now we're ready to go and do our hypothesis test to actually find that test statistic and the p-value. So in order to do that, I'm going to press stat. I'm going to arrow over to the right so that I'm under tests, that same menu that I've been going to. And then I'm going to scroll all the way down right here. It's pretty far down. we're going to go to option C, which is our chi-square test. So that's what we want to use. We're going to go ahead and press enter. And at this point, it's going to ask you for just a couple things. You just need the observed values, which this is the data as we see it. This is the results from our survey or whatever it is. We put those into matrix A, and as long as you put those into matrix A, we never have to do anything else right there. So that's really the only one that matters a lot. The expected value, the calculator is actually going to find some expected values for us, and it's going to put us, in this case, into matrix B. We don't care so much about that. We just want the p-value in the test statistic. So then at this point, we can go down to either calculate or draw. Both should give us the same information. If I choose calculate, it will tell me my chi-square value right there is 1.3121, and then the p-value right below it would be 0.8593. It also tells me the degrees of freedom for. So if all I'm after is the test statistic and the p-value, that's it. That's good. If you want a representation of what that p-value looks like, though, if I go back into that menu, if I press set stats, arrow over to the right so that I'm under tests, and then remember we want to go all the way down to option C. You can also go to the draw function, and this still gives you the test statistic and the p-value, but it's also going to give you a representation of the p-value under that chi-square distribution. So we should see something which is right skewed, which is what we have right here, and that shaded blue area this time around represents the p-value. That's the area to the right. So in this case, our chi-square value is 1.3121. I'm going to write that over here. My chi-square value is 1.3121, and then our p-value, let me hop back one more time, is 0.8593. So 0.8593. And of course, we'll be using in particular this p-value to help us make our decision in the next step when we talk about, making our decision, interpreting our decision within the context of our problem. But we are going to need to know how to calculate the test statistic and the p-value. So please make sure that you get some practice with this process and feel comfortable using the graphing calculator. Remember that if you don't have one, there's a link to a graphing calculator, an online emulator above this. It should be at the top of this page, and you'll have access to that on quizzes and tests, and you'll be able to use that.